Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing this evening? Okay, my name is Colby Hitchcock, and I'm the Director of Operations for Baue Funeral Home. And I get the pleasure of doing the introduction tonight. And it's good to see so many of you guys coming out. And just wanted to share with you, just since Baue's inception in 1935, we've had a foundational principle of service to our community. And that's what we're doing here tonight. Arthur Baue passed it down to his son, and passed it to his daughter, passed it to her son. And we're happy that that we can provide these types of services to you guys. And just hope that when you leave tonight that you'll have some tools and some skills to help you with your loss. Just a few housekeeping things tonight. Cell phones, please turn those off. And then you will have a survey in your packet. And the survey, what we do with that survey is we want to know, good, bad, or indifferent. We want to know what's going on. That way, for the next program, we can adjust and change our program to better address those needs. Restrooms, if you haven't been, it's the longest walk in the world. You go out and around, and it will be the last door, and you'll say, there's not a restroom here, but it's there, I promise. So it's around there. And we do have some upcoming events, and one of those is our Holiday Remembrance Program. And those are, of course, be December 2nd would be, and then on the Friday before and the Monday after. But the details are on our website. We use these cool little QR codes, and if we made it through COVID, we know that we had a restaurant, we had to use those. So all you do is get on, hit it with your QR code, and you can register for those events. So again, our speaker tonight is Kelly Karavousanos, and she's going to teach you all how to be a buffalo. Okay? I know you're like, what's that? What are you talking about? Well, I'm a man that speaks in gibberish. So what I want to share with you is on the plains of the western United States, when a storm rolls from the west and is headed east, okay, there's a couple of things that happen, and I want you to think about that storm being your grief, okay? Now, a cow, not actually known to be a super smart animal. They will head east, away from the storm. And they just keep going, and they're in the storm for a month of Sundays, right? The buffalo sees the storm coming, and they turn toward the storm, and they face the storm head on, because they know that the quickest way to get resolution from the storm is to go through it. So that's what I mean about Kelly's going to teach you how to be a buffalo tonight. And I hope you learned something from that. I thought it was pretty interesting. So now I'm going to talk about Kelly. So Kelly is a compassionate and passionate licensed professional counselor, certified thanatologist, licensed funeral director, coach, educator, public speaker. She has worked for over 25 years in a variety of settings, including substance abuse treatment, hospice, community mental health, and private practice, helping individuals mind, body, and soul. Her passion and career focus is grief, loss, and life transition. She has been a frequent educator and speaker on topics of grief, loss, stress management, change, and resilience in times of crisis, and other aspects of leadership and mental health. She volunteers as the co-lead of the Professional Women's Mentorship Program for the Athena Leadership Foundation, and is a board member of Turning Point Advocacy Services. She and her family reside in St. Charles County, and she won't tell you this, but I'm going to brag on her. You'll see some really awesome photographs throughout the presentation tonight. She took those, so she enjoys getting out and getting her forest bathing on. So she took a lot of those wonderful pictures, so I'll give her some credit for that. And then lastly, one last housekeeping. On your survey, if you want the information that's on the slides and some tools and some contacts that are in our community for grief support, all you have to do is provide the email, and we're going to send a blast out for grief resources in our community. So without further ado, please welcome Kelly Karavousanos.
Bill. Thank you all for being here this evening. I appreciate it. And he said that about the pictures, but I do have to say this first one's not my picture, so all the rest of them are. So thank you all for being here this evening. I'm honestly very sorry that you have to be here and that you have to walk through that storm like Colby shared, but I am glad that you sought to come here to do something to help yourself. So thank you for being here. And whether you're new on this journey or you've been on this path for a while, my hope is that you will take away something from tonight's seminar that will bring you some comfort, because that's really what we're all looking for, right, in our grief, is some kind of comfort. And when someone dies, that sometimes can be impossible, if not, it's elusive. It comes and goes so quickly. So it seems like we're always just seeking that out. But I hope that tonight we will kind of talk about ways. And I know that sometimes it feels like you might never find that comfort. And it might never feel, quote unquote, normal again. And we'll talk about normal and what that really means tonight. But I really just want to honor your courage for walking in here tonight and to face your journey. And thank you. So Colby gave you some information about, some of the things that I've done, but I want to talk a little bit more about my why. So this picture here is a picture of my grandmother. She was diagnosed with lung cancer at age 56, and we were really very close, as you can see in that picture. I was very young. I was about 20, maybe 20 years old in that picture. And she had raised 5 boys, and I was her first grandchild, and I was a girl. So you can really imagine just how spoiled I was and how close our relationship was. So she was just a very fun woman, and I really have so many wonderful memories of her. When she got sick, we called in hospice, which many of you may have experiences with hospice. And I really tried to spend as much time with her as I could. I was in my last year of college. I was trying to go to school. I was working full-time at that time, and then the rest of the time I was splitting, trying to be there to help with caregiving for her. Her cancer treatment and her death were quite brutal. This was in 1997. It was just tough, and she was really one of the strongest people I know. I always tell the story, my mom tells this story all the time, when she met, this is my dad's mother, and when she met my grandmother was coming out from underneath a car. She had just changed the carburetor. So if you just want to kind of know what kind of woman she was, right? She could just about do anything. And we just thought she could, right? We just thought she could beat it. That was how we felt about it. But she didn't. And she ended up dying. And we were devastated. As a family, we were a very young family. We had never had a loss before. And we were lost. And nobody really knew what to do. I could not wrap my mind around the fact that I would never see her walking this earth again. I would have dreams that she was alive and wake up so disappointed that my dream was not reality and that I had to get up and face this world without her in it. I remember feeling sad and confused, devastated, and most of all, without guidance. Some of the messages that I received were things like, you know what? You need to get on with it. You're in your last semester of school. She would have wanted you. You need to do what she would have wanted you to do. She wanted you to finish school, so you need to quit being sad. Literally, those were the words that were said, and move forward through this. You've got to graduate. That's what she would want for you. Other messages I heard were things like, well, you just need to have gratitude, right? You need to have gratitude that you had her for as long as you did. I'm just going to tell you, in this picture, she's 58 years old. That's too young. I'm 47 right now, and as I get closer to that, that gets younger and younger, right? I could have taken her for so much longer. forever. So gratitude was really hard to find in that moment. It's not helpful. And so part of my why is I don't want anyone to ever feel that lost as they're walking down their journey of grief, as lost as I felt through that time. And I'm going to fast forward to 2015. This is a picture of my dad, and he died of bladder cancer, coincidentally, also at age 58. And this picture was taken of him 40 days actually before he died. He was able to be with me at my wedding, and so I do have a lot of gratitude for that. But again, we were devastated by his loss. And a lot of people ask me if being a grief counselor made my grief any easier. And I said then, and I say now, no, nothing. Nothing could have made that easier. What did make my journey different was having knowledge and having information and having resources and support. And so that did make my grief different. So when I did have those dreams, I didn't feel like I must be going crazy or that there's something wrong with me. And when I was hurting, I was able to reach out, come to seminars like this, talk to somebody about it. And that did make my grief journey different. So that is why I think doing what you guys are doing tonight is take such courage, and thank you for being brave enough to do that. So again, just a little bit about my why. Tonight we're going to talk about your grief journey. We're going to talk about my guideposts to healing, and we're going to talk about self-compassion. And so all of those things, and I don't go in any particular order, I'm just going to talk about what is most important to me, and I hope that that will fit with you guys. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how unique this is. So I just want to promise, even as we start out the gate, that I don't have any easy answers or quick fix remedies that will take away your pain and suffering. There's no antidote to the pain of grief. There's no easy, quick ways to feel better in the moment. And for many people, the journey is long, unpredictable, and difficult. But I hope to help you see that there is comfort along the way. So we're not looking to get rid of it. We're looking to what can we do to soothe it? What can we do to find comfort along the way? And grief is hard for a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons is that it's so contradictory, right? We can have two different things existing at the same time. People can be hurting and still keep moving forward. They can get up and keep going to work every day, just while they're hurting, right? Sometimes people will come into my office and they'll say, well, people think because I'm back at work that everything must be okay. That's like, nothing could be further from the truth. I am hurting, but what choice do I have? I have to get up. I have to keep going forward. So people can have these two opposite things happening, and grief is filled with contradictory things like that. People can laugh and still be grieving at the same time. So laughter doesn't mean that you're not still grieving. People can feel gratitude and feel sorrow at the same time. So it's very complicated. I do want to add that I'll go back to the gratitude, and I'll repeat myself a lot throughout because I think we need to hear it multiple times. But gratitude is not an antidote for grief. It's not something that takes it away. I look at it more as a comfort measure, but not necessarily an antidote. And I know that some of us will struggle to do the simplest of things. Sometimes getting up and even getting in the shower, sometimes making a meal, sometimes even, those simple things that people think, well, those should be easy for you to do. No, they're not easy. So they can be the hardest things, and that's okay. And I want you to hear that's okay tonight. But it is possible to grieve and live a life with comfort and to have all kinds of emotions that exist along your journey. And as we talk tonight, please know that I'm just touching the surface of the information out there. And my words, really, they may resonate with you, they may not. You can agree or disagree. I tell people all the time, it is 100% okay to disagree with me. Please tell me when you disagree with me, right? Because this is truly your unique journey. So take what resonates with you and just leave the rest. So that's my hope for tonight. I want to talk about what shapes your grief experience. You know, I said every journey is unique, right? These factors that I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of them, they help us understand our own why. You know, I shared with you a little bit about my why, but these factors help shape your why. Why are you grieving the way? Why is your journey the way it is, right? So the first is the circumstances surrounding your loss. So how your loved one died, how old they were, the circumstances. Was it peaceful? Was there violence involved? Those kinds of things we need to take into account. Was there a long struggle? You know, at the end of my dad's life, he was in so much pain that we were praying for him to be out of pain, right? So understanding what are the circumstances and to know that those matter when it comes to shaping your loss. And the reason I think these matter, and I want you to pay attention to them in regards to your own journey, is because I hear so many comparisons, right? So many people want to compare their loss to somebody else's loss. Well, you know, Susie down the street, she lost her husband too, and she's already dating. It's only been, 10 months. And so, but we're not in somebody's life, right? We don't know what their circumstances were. You can only know your own. And so I always want you to pull back and remember that comparison, you can't compare unless you know every single little facet of what somebody else is experiencing. It isn't fair to you to compare yourself to anyone else. So the next one is who the person is that died and who you are, right? So your personality, their personality, and the next one, I kind of combine those, that your relationship with the person who died. All of those things shape your grief experience. I think it's, I had somebody share with me one time they were very concerned because they had lost both their parents, mom and dad. Mom went very early, and then dad later on in life, and they came in very concerned that they were grieving them differently and they didn't understand why. So we started to talk about the relationship, and when mom died, he was off at college, and there were all these circumstances that created distance in their relationship. And then when dad died, he was taking care of the grandkids, he was involved in their daily life, and there was a much different relationship. So we need to look at that relationship. It matters what that relationship looks like because it does shape. I also want to add that if that relationship is complicated, that can also, and what I mean by complicated is that if your loss was with someone who struggled with mental health issues or addiction issues, or if there was conflict within your relationship, then that can also shape your grief. So just knowing that those little factors, all these little things kind of play a big role in your journey. And it's important that you kind of recognize what those are. Your loss history. I gave a seminar this morning to professionals, and I had somebody come up and she shared with me that she was trying to support a woman who had in the past 2 years, she had 8 losses in 2 years. And she was at a loss of how to help this woman because this woman was just shut down. Because there's so much, right? So much loss in this short period of time. So understanding your loss history, that's going to shape and kind of wind you along that path. So knowing your loss history. Our society and culture, it's really important to know how that also shapes our journey. So frankly, we don't do grief well as a society. Our society tends to quiet people who are grieving. Our society tends to be uncomfortable with pain, and there's often this expectation that people move on, get over it. You got to get on with life. I mean, we're based on independence, right? We need to be independent. And unfortunately, what I have found with grief, one of the most important things is connection. So it's the opposite of that independence. It's connection. I know a lot of people in here that attend support groups. Without that connection, they would feel lost, kind of just out there roaming around without that. So connection is very important. And our culture, they'll say things like, well, it's been 2 weeks, it's been a couple months, it's been a year. What's going on? Why can't you seem to get to the next step? So culture plays a big role. And I think a large part of what I try to do is push back against that by education, push back about that by teaching people that you don't have to, that's actually an unrealistic expectation. That's like not going to happen. I would tell people, if people have that expectation of you, they're going to be very disappointed because that's not the way grief works. So understanding how our culture shapes your grief experience. Another factor are secondary losses occurring at the time of a loss. So secondary losses are things that, you have if, for instance, I'll give an example. It's just the easiest way to explain secondary losses. If a young mother loses her husband, then she's also lost her father, the father to her children. She's lost an additional income maybe. She's lost the future plans that they had together. So in every loss, there are secondary losses that ripple out from that loss. So being able to identify what your secondary losses are and how they play into, it's even something as simple as somebody shared this morning that what was one thing that was particularly difficult for them was having family photos, that they had family photos every year. And so one of the ways that they kind of tried to cope with that was they had, that was a loss for them. That was like a loss they didn't realize was going to be a loss because they got together to take these photos and it was just so evident that he wasn't there to be in them. So instead, they carried a rose. And so every picture afterwards, the rose was included and one of the family members held the rose. And it helped them just brought them comfort. That's what comforted them, right? That's how they chose to cope with that. But those secondary losses can sometimes sneak up. We don't really know what they are until they present themselves. So just being aware of your secondary losses and how they're, and to be able to identify them. And the last is, going the wrong way, pressing buttons. The last one is your access and use of support. I can't tell you how many times I'm talking with someone and I ask them about their support system because that's one of the key places that people find comfort is their support system. And they'll say to me, I have a wonderful church family. I have a wonderful support system. I have all these girlfriends and I have a great support system. So my next follow-up question is always, okay, so when was the last time you reached out to the support system for your support? And they're like, what? I don't want to bother. I don't want to be a downer. I don't know. I guess I just don't. There's something within us that recognizes that we have that support system, but there's a secondary piece of that. You have to use the support system. You have to let them bring you the meals, pick up kids. You have to let them be that shoulder for you to cry on. And I had one woman who said, well, the only person in my support system is my sister. And I said, well, how do you reach out to her? She goes, well, on Friday nights, I get in my pajamas, I go over there, we cuddle on the couch, we watch movies, we eat popcorn, and I just be with her. I just be. And that was the most amazing support for her. That's what she needed. She needed that comfort, that connection that they had with no expectations, right? They were just going to watch movies. And that was what was right for her. So it's not just about having a support system. It's about letting them support you, because shared pain is lighter, right? So the next portion that I want to talk about is just a few definitions. I got a couple questions this morning about, when you're reading, or when, what is grief, what is grieving, what is mourning? And so just quickly, I just want to talk about how I describe grief is just, it's kind of like the wave that knocks you off your feet, right? It's the intense emotions that you're feeling. It could be sadness, it could be guilt, it could be anger, jealousy, loneliness, often physical pain. Those are all how we define grief. So they're the emotions, the piece. It's the natural response to loss, right? That's what we naturally experience when we lose someone we love, when we lose someone who is such an integral part of our life. It's defined here as the collection of those feelings and experience. And then grieving is the process of coming to terms with those feelings. And mourning is your external response, right? So I want to touch a little bit on mourning, because I think that oftentimes people, mourning can look like a lot of different things, right? But it's the way that you express your feelings. And just as there's no wrong or right way to grieve, there's no wrong or right way to mourn. The important thing is that you're doing it in some way. I think that I could give 100 examples, but simply put, funerals, celebrations of life, those are ways that we mourn. I have seen so many different things. I've seen tattoos. I've seen car stickers, jewelry. I'm not wearing it tonight, but I have a thumbprint from my father, and I wear that. I have a ring that belongs to my grandmother, and I wear that. And those are ways that I outwardly express. Those are mourning. Those are ways that we mourn. And I could go on. I have like a whole list here, but I'm not going to go through the whole list. But what I do want to say about mourning, it can also be things like sharing things on Facebook or any social media that you're on. When you're sharing pictures, or you're sharing experiences, or talking about anniversaries. A couple weeks ago, I shared about this dream that I had about my dad, and it just brought me comfort, and I wanted to share that. But that's also mourning. Telling stories about them, that is mourning, that is your expression. And unfortunately, I guess the main point I want you to get from this is that unfortunately some people are not comfortable with these public displays, right? They're not comfortable with that pain, and they don't understand. And in fact, just in this past 2 weeks, I've had people come in and say, well, my mom and my sister aren't following me on Facebook anymore because they said they just can't handle me posting anything about my child. And my response to that is, okay, well, that's their prerogative, but you need to still be able to mourn. And I want you to still be posting those things, be talking about her, and I hear that a lot. People aren't comfortable and they want to quiet you. I mean, even I had somebody share that they were at work and a coworker had said to them, maybe you need to take that picture of your daughter down. What? No, right? No. And that's when you say, no, I'm good. I'm good with leaving that up. Thank you. I was actually at a bereaved parents group a couple of months ago, and someone shared a story about that actually, people sharing with them after it had only been a couple of months, and their family was surrounding them saying, Okay, when are you going to get back to normal? When are you going to get back to, the mom that we knew? Well, never. Right? Never. That's not going to happen. And so just understanding that this is the part where I said, when people have expectations, they're going to be disappointed. And that's okay. Let them be disappointed, because it is a necessary piece to move forward in your journey for you to mourn in whatever way is right for you. And this is a really embarrassing picture of me because I couldn't find any other picture that I was standing next to a sign. But as you can tell, I'm a hiker. I love hiking, and I hike in place where getting lost can be quite dangerous. So when we're hiking, we're always looking for guideposts to help keep us safe, right? And those guideposts help us keep on the path, know if there's going to be bears ahead or rocky, inclines. Kind of tells us what to look for on our journey. And so tonight, I'm going to offer up some guideposts that I hope are intended to help you along your journey. Again, I want to offer them with caution that this is your journey. So some of what I share might resonate, but what doesn't, just leave that and take the rest. So the first guidepost along the journey is that there are times when you think you might be going crazy, but you're not. This is often when I get a phone call. Many people share that they feel, I myself have felt like I'm going crazy. But the feelings and emotions that you experience in grief are not the feelings and emotions that you're used to, right? It's different. So it's difficult to know what's normal, what's abnormal, what feels crazy and what's not. And I think that that's the question that we ask ourselves is what am I supposed to be feeling, because this is so wrong and different, right? Some of the feelings that people report are feeling anxious, restless, impatient, disorganized, confused. Often people report walking into a room. Some people say, I feel like I'm getting dementia. I mean, that's a real concern people share, that I feel like I walk into a room, I start a project, then I walk out of that room, and then I walk into a different room and I start something else. And I have 20 things going on and I don't even know where I'm supposed to be. So feeling just disorganized. Often during the acute phase of grief, also people get time distortion, right? It's like, where did the time go? It feels like I just sat down to do this task and it's already, 4 hours later. So time can speed up, time can slow down, but time kind of gets distorted around grief. And I actually was talking about, when I was putting this presentation together and I was writing that my dad had died 8 years ago. I'm like, how is that possible? I remember it was like yesterday. I have memories of him like from yesterday. How is that possible? So time gets distorted. In that acute phase of grief and long after, also people feel unusually tired. That also makes people feel, is this normal? And they are just so fatigued. And grief is exhausting. So knowing that that's part of this process, I hope will help you feel a little less crazy. Right after my grandmother died, I was in the mall. I don't know, does anybody remember Northwest Plaza? It's like, right? Okay, so I was in Northwest Plaza right after she died. She died in December, and I was shopping, and I swear that I heard her yell out to me. She had the kind of voice, I have a pretty strong voice. Her voice was the kind where the phone, when you answered the phone, you just held it out to hear her talk to her, because she was very loud. I swear I heard her. I turned around, I looked for her, I felt her presence. I know that she yelled out my name. But in that moment, I felt crazy. Like once I realized, wait a minute, she's gone, right? I felt crazy. What I know now is that's a very normal experience. People have dreams. People hear their loved ones. They feel their presence. They have dreams about them. So there's all kinds. That's a very normal and can be a very comforting experience when you know that it's that it's normal and natural to have those experiences. Other times people during this time when they're feeling crazy, I encourage them to find ways to feel connected. And I think that that is something that a lot of times, in years past, people thought that we had to actually disconnect from them to be able to move forward. And in my work, I try to get people to connect. You're taking a relationship. The relationship doesn't end when they die, right? It continues, but it's a relationship of memory, not a relationship of physical presence. So I encourage people to find ways to stay connected. And I think that those are ways that people find some comfort, right? When you can stay connected. There may be moments where you feel like it didn't really happen. Like I shared about waking up and going, wait a minute, is she really gone? Or was that a dream? Even though you know it really did happen. And I often describe this as head knowledge versus heart knowledge. Grief is a heart experience, right? It's a heart journey. The head knows a lot, but it doesn't know grief. So what you know in your head, even though I tell people it's always like really close on your body, but they're miles apart when it comes to grief, because that's really what's going on this journey. Your head knows that, they're not here any longer. You're not delusional. You're not in denial. Your heart is just going to take a lot longer to wrap itself around that reality. And if we force it by staying focused on the pain of our loss, sometimes I feel like our heart would break. I tell people, you need to take breaks from your grief. You cannot be in it 100% of the time. So taking breaks from your grief will also help. And I think it's absolutely necessary. You may wish to tell your story repeatedly. You need to tell it over and over and over again. And why that helps us is it helps to make it real, right? The more we tell it, the more things we remember, the things that, it's important, the more that we share that story. You may still talk to your loved one. And if you don't do this, I highly recommend that you do. I was on my way here this morning and I had a conversation with my dad about actually giving this talk. And it helps me. It provides me with comfort. But at the end of the day, all of these feelings and experiences are normal and natural. And just remember that just because it's not something you have ever done before, that doesn't make it wrong. The next guidepost is healing and grief are not linear. And I know that's everywhere. I actually have clients come in and tell me, I know grief's not linear, but always hear the but behind it. But grief is confusing because it's not linear, right? Who here loves to check off the boxes? As we're getting through something, right? I always have a list of things going. Even when something's not on my list, I'll put it on my list just so I can check it off. I did that one, right? So checking the boxes, our brains love that. We want to be able to, because you know what it helps us do? It helps us figure out how to get to the end. If I'm checking off boxes, that must mean I'm moving forward, right? I am going to get to the end of this. And there's a lot of stage models out there that lead us to believe that grief is orderly, like a step-by-step process, but it's not. And if you're sitting in here tonight, you know that it's not. So instead, I often describe grief to clients as a tornado. They're just walking along, and the tornado's swirling around them. And in that tornado looks like things like we talked about already: despair, anger, frustration, confusion. And because it's a tornado and there's all this debris in it, you really don't know when you're going to get hit by any of those things. You also don't know when that tornado will quiet down to a dark but peaceful rain cloud, or what might cause it to flare up again. So we don't know when those things, so that's what feels, and that's not a linear process, right? Grief is unpredictable. It's influenced by all of those factors that we talked about before. One day you might feel okay, and the next day grief might kind of punch you in the gut. And knowing and expecting grief to be unpredictable in this way, I hope helps you become a more self-compassionate griever. So again, this comes back to, how do you find comfort? How do you comfort yourself? Well, when you know that it might be frustrating because you want to be in a different place, but yet that's not where you are, right? Today's a hard day. And and understanding that, you can maybe say to yourself, today's not a good day. And when people ask you if you feel that they are the kind of person who wants to actually hear the truth, it's okay to say, today's not a good grief day. Today's a bad grief day. Or today is a good grief day. It's okay to be honest. The next guidepost along your journey is, often you may feel like you are moving backwards, but you're not. And I think this one, a lot of you will recognize. So many share that statement with me. I feel like I was doing really, really well, and then A, B, C, or D happened, and I'm right back where I started. But the truth is, you're not. No one can take away the growth and the movement that you've made in that time. Now, is it a bad grief day? Yeah, maybe. But you're not right back where you started. And I think that coming back to that, knowing that you may have, and I say day, but I really mean it could be minute, it could be hour, it could be a bad grief week. These two guideposts are connected, these two, talking about, not being linear and moving backwards, right? You're not moving backwards because you were never moving forwards. Does that make sense? No one can take away the healing that has already occurred. So how we speak to ourselves about our grief matters. So when you say to yourself, I am all the way back where I started, that feels disheartening, right? That feels lonely. That feels disempowering. I really encourage you to remind yourself that you're not right back where you started. You're just having a down day, a down week, a down minute, a down hour, whatever it is, because we're all going to have those. The next guidepost is something everyone knows, but we still want to find the right way. I have people who come in all the time, and I myself have felt this. There's got to be a right way to do this, right? Because as human beings, we've got to find the right way. But and I think grief is so painful that we feel like, well, we must be doing something wrong. If it hurts this bad, if I feel like my heart's being ripped out of my chest when I wake up in the morning, I must be doing something wrong. But you're not doing anything wrong. That is the nature of grief. So understanding that there is no right or wrong, I will repeat that 100 times. Not tonight. I won't make you listen to that 100 times tonight. But I do think it's that important to go back to that, because the story that, again, what you say to yourself matters. And if the story in your head is, I am doing this wrong, then that increases our suffering, right? You're not doing anything wrong. Grief hurts. This is a painful thing. Finding those resources and helping others, helping each other is important. And I think it links to having unrealistic expectations of ourselves, right? It's not a realistic expectation that you be back to normal, or that you are producing. I hear this one a lot. I'm back to work, but I'm not at the level I was before. Well, you can't be. You can't be at the level you were. And to have that expectation increases your suffering, right? Compassion for yourself is to say, you know what? I'm hurting, and that's okay. I'm supposed to be here. I can't force myself, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how much we're scratching to get away from it. We can't get away from that, and nor should we. The reality is that there'll be ups and downs, highs and lows. There's no set timeline. That's the other part of right or wrong that I want to repeat, and probably again repeat 100 times. There's no set timeline, and you won't be able to pack up your grief in a nice little box and put it away in your heart and move forward. I mean, that's just not the way that grief works. And I think a lot of times that's what we're looking for. How do we get it so that we don't have to do it? And, Colby shared the Buffalo story about heading into the storm. That's really what this part is about, right? You're heading into walking in here. Walking in here tonight was heading into that storm. Going to a support group is heading into that storm. Reading a book on grief, journaling about your loss, all of those things are you heading into your storm. And there's no right or wrong way to do that. There's no time that you should be doing that or shouldn't be doing that. There's just no right or wrong way. Next is that other people will have expectations for you, and they will be disappointed. And that is okay. That is okay. It's hard to know what to do with other people's expectations, right? It's hard to know because it feels like, well, they're trying to help me. They're trying to help me along this journey. So, I think that going back to that bereaved mom that shared with me, she said that her family was saying things to her like, well, it's been 5 months and, they really are pushing me to get out, be normal again. And, we talked about this, well, you're going to disappoint them, and that's okay, because there is no getting back to normal. We're going to talk about that. Unless somebody, and even when somebody has walked in your shoes, maybe they have had a similar loss, they still don't know your journey. They still can't tell you what you should be doing. That is the only thing. I think it's important to know you are exactly where you should be, even when you don't want to be there. But that's part of this journey. So let them be disappointed. Next is, you will never be the person you were before your loved one died. And I think this one I included because I often hear not only that it's other people's expectations, but it's your internal expectations. You didn't choose to be here, right? You didn't want to lose your loved one. You didn't want to be grieving them. Life would be better if they were here. So when you don't choose this, so you might be hearing, so it's an internal expectation sometimes, and it's an external expectation. So they're kind of getting it from both ways at times. But the loss of a loved one, when someone dies, it changes us in ways we can't always explain, we don't know, and trying to bring back the old you is as impossible as bringing back your loved one. You've been changed by their loss, by their death, and the loss that comes after. So I think sometimes it's good to, use examples, because it could be something as big as after my grandmother died, I mentioned that, I was that spoiled granddaughter. Well, one of the things that she just thought I could do anything. Like if I said, I'm going to be president and I'm going to rule the world and all of this, she'd be, of course you are, right? Can't imagine that not happening, right? So she was always my constant cheerleader. And when she died, I looked around for that cheerleader and I didn't have one. So I was changed. What do I do? So I had to learn how to be my own cheerleader in that state. So sometimes it's about the change that happens internally within us. But sometimes it's also about the changes that happen externally. So maybe you have to, learn how to do things that you never did before. If your spouse died and they always took care of the bills, or I'll never forget a gentleman who came into my group and he had never done laundry before, and he figured out how to do laundry, and he was so excited that he had figured out how to operate these darn machines. Those aren't the words he used, but those are machines, right? So those kinds of changes, like, we are changed forever in a variety of ways, more ways than we can ever express or even put words to. So understanding that sometimes it's an internal emotional change, oftentimes our priorities change, right? What was important before is no longer important now. Our tolerance changes. We may not be as tolerant of people and things that we maybe had a whole lot of tolerance for before, right? So understanding that those things change. But we are not the person we were before they died. And often that struggle to get back there creates more suffering. So I bring this as a guidepost because I hope that understanding that those changes, and kind of maybe if even it changes your internal self-talk to say, I'm not that person anymore. There's a lot of me, there's pieces of me, but it's not the whole me, because things have been changed. I actually said this one time in a group, and a person stood up and got really mad at me and said, but I don't want to be this person. Frankly, I didn't ask for it, and I'm offended that she would even say that. And she really was, and I don't blame her, because it isn't. I mean, that is a fact. You don't want to be. You want it to be. And so it ended up actually that a couple of years later, I ended up seeing her, and we had this whole conversation about it. And but it stuck in my mind. She was really mad. And sometimes we get really mad. This isn't where we wanted to be, right? It's okay to be really mad and to protest our loss. If we're not protesting, then in some way, then we haven't really lost anything, right? Because that's what we do. Oftentimes we protest, and it looks different for everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean anger. It just means I'm not okay with this, right? It can look like anger, but it can look like a whole bunch of other things as well. The next guidepost is that it's okay to take breaks from your grief. And I kind of touched on this a little bit already. Somebody once shared with me that they had gone to spend time with their grandkids and come home and realized that for the whole 4 hours that they were with their grandkids, that they didn't think about their grief. They actually laughed and had a good time. And when she got home, she felt so guilty. How could I be laughing? How could I be having fun when he's gone? How could I be enjoying this, right? So how could I, and then she said, how could I forget? And she was questioning, like, how could this happen? But the truth is, you can't spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in your grief. Always facing your grief head on. Because I can guarantee if you leave here tonight, you're going to be tired, you're going to be exhausted from feeling, you're going to be more fatigued. It takes something out of us when we face our grief, right? So you can't do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have to be able to give ourselves permission. There's actually, I've shared this with some people, there's a model called the dual process model, and they talk about 2 different aspects of ourselves that are happening when we're grieving. One is loss orientation activities, and one is restoration oriented activities. So defining those 2 things. You're doing a loss-oriented activity right now. You're here, you're thinking about your loss, you're facing your loss. It can also be things like listening to your favorite song, going to their gravesite, going to a support group. All of those are loss-oriented activities, right? And then they also talk about restoration-oriented activities. So restoration-oriented activities look like Maybe just the activities of daily living, going to work, making new friends. Maybe they're the friends you have in a support group and you're going out to watch a movie together and have fun. Those are restoration-oriented activities. And this model shows in the picture, and I probably should have put the picture in here, but I didn't, but just consider those two different activities that we have to have in our life, and you have to ping pong back and forth, right? You have to go back and forth from them. You have to have, as much as you need the loss-oriented activities, you need the restoration, because that's when you gather your energy to do the hard work of grief, right? So you need both. And I encourage you to kind of just be aware of those, because sometimes people will come in and say, you can't spend all your time in loss, but you also can't spend all your time in restoration either. So some people will come to me and they'll say that, well, I don't need to do any of that. I've been doing this and this. They've been running, basically. And so they're spending all their time in here. So we talk about why it's necessary to have some time in law. And there's, going back to the other guidepost, so that there's no wrong or right way to do this. There's no wrong or right way. How much time do I spend in this? How much time do I spend in that? There's no equation for that. This comes back to what is right for you, right? What is right for you? And I encourage people to remember that loss is experienced in doses. So coming here tonight, be extra careful with yourself, extra gentle with yourself, because this does take energy. It takes energy to talk about your loss and face that head on. The next guidepost that I want to share is talking about it's okay to say no to things that you don't want to do. So oftentimes, again, this is maybe about people's expectations, but the expectation of being things back to normal. And I'll use the holidays as they're coming up. People are often dreading the holidays coming up, because there's this expectation that things need to be the way that they were. Again, things aren't the way they were. So right after my grandmother died, it was in December, and she had been sick. I talked to my mom and I said, my mom said, I'm not putting up the Christmas tree. And I was like, well, you have to put up the Christmas tree, right? This was a long time ago, before I had all this. Now I would say, Mom, it's okay to not put up the Christmas tree. But at the time I was like, no, you've got to put up the Christmas tree. That doesn't make any sense. And so she ended up putting up the Christmas tree, but she ended up putting the Christmas tree in the basement, because then she didn't have to walk by it every day, right? So it's okay to say no to things that stretch you beyond your tolerance. And right now, you may have very little tolerance, right? So be okay with saying no. I always push back against the expectation that we white knuckle it through our way to acceptance. So if going on the couple's vacation with your friends that you always went on with your spouse is too much, don't go. You may change your mind next year, but it's okay to say no. And maybe also it's okay to say maybe, if that's an acceptable response for the particular event, right? So maybe I'll decide on the day. It's okay to say, I don't really know if I'm going to have a good grief day or a bad grief day that day. So I'll let you know, but as it stands right now, maybe, right? It's okay to do that. Sometimes people feel like they have to do something. Oftentimes people will say, well, I don't want to go to this funeral. Is it okay to say no? And those are the kinds of questions that are so individual. I just tell people, if you do, put in some measures of, I'm only going to stay for this short amount of time. Maybe I'm just going to go in and sign the book and come out. Maybe I'm not going to, and it is okay to say, no, I'm not going to go. I'm going to send flowers, or I'm going to visit later. So understand and I think it comes back to the tolerance of what you can tolerate. I know that I have physical limits. I am not going to go run a marathon tomorrow. I know that, right? I think we all know our physical limits. But for some reason, we think that our emotional limits should have no bounds. We should just be able to go and do and never think twice about it. But the truth is, if you compare the two, we have just as much emotional limitations as we do physical. And we need to know what they are. And we need to respect them and honor them. It's okay if you need more rest. It's okay to say no. It's okay to fill your bucket and go to those support groups and find those connections. So know what those limits are. And I do want to say lastly, it doesn't mean it's okay to isolate or avoid. Always add that one on the back in there when I say it's okay to say no. Isolation is always a little dangerous, so be careful of that. You should be connecting with your support system as you need to, but thinking in those terms, what are my emotional limits? And if you're pressing them or it's too far, don't go. The next guidepost along your journey is the relationship that you have with your loved one does not end, it only changes. And sometimes people think that when their loved one dies, they're no longer, we've had people say, like, am I still a father? Am I still a mother? Am I still a wife? And that's a very upsetting thought, right? I don't want to think in those terms because I didn't choose to be here. And so, I'm going to, again, push back against that. Absolutely, you're still a mother. Absolutely, you're still a father and still a wife or a husband or a child. I'm still my father's daughter. Just because he's gone, that doesn't change that. I'm actually quite proud of that. That's something that is a comfort to me. So when someone dies, though, it changes the relationship. And the old way of thinking, like I said before, was that we had to disconnect from them. I had somebody come into the support group one time that shared that she came for her husband, but what she ended up sharing in the group was that when she was a child, her mother had died. And when she died, her father went through, because this was the way of thinking, I can't blame them, this was what was kind of general knowledge at the time. He took down all the pictures of her. He was remarried within a couple months, and she was not allowed to talk about her mom. She said, it's almost like she was erased, right? So that's an extreme example, but it happens. And I think even today, I don't typically hear those kinds of stories anymore, but there is still remnants of that belief that we need to disconnect rather than connect. So I just want you to know that example that I gave it really disturbed her. And we talked a lot about how not having had that chance to grieve her mom really affected her. And so we talked about how can you now, so we can always go back and do that repair work, right? So how do you go back now and connect with her? We continue to have this relationship of memory until we die. So cultivate what that looks like. I don't ever want to forget my relationship with my loved ones who've died. So we need to cultivate, and we can find different ways to stay connected. I already talked about some of those linking objects, those things, we also light a candle. When I have family over, even if it's just over for dinner, I'll light Dad's candle just because that's what's meaningful to me, and that helps me stay connected. So it's a mistake to think that to move forward, you must leave the past behind and tuck it away. It is possible to move forward while cultivating that healthy, compassionate connection with your loved one. Next is there's no moving on, getting over it, there's 1,000 other cliches about how do you get through this, right? So oftentimes people say, well, at the end of the day, what is the goal then? If if grief lasts forever and we're always going to be carrying that grief with us, then really what is the goal? And so to me, the goal is to integrate your loss so that as you are moving moving forward in life, that you're carrying it with you, but it becomes lighter through the work that you do. So I had someone share an example with me. She said, and it's kind of a visual example. So she said, in the beginning of my grief, the first year to 2 years, my grief was like this. All the time. When I was at work, it was like this. When I woke up, it was like this. Everywhere I looked, it was right here. It clouded everything, right? So as she worked through her grief, journaling, talking about them, all the things that we've talked about tonight, her grief moved over slowly to where it was more sitting on her shoulder. Always there, but not clouding her view. And kind of a visual person, so that's the best way that I can give an example, because we know that we don't ever, pack it away and move on from it. And rather, it's more of an integrated process where we pull them in and continue that relationship of memory. So those are my guideposts to healing. Next, I'm going to talk about self-compassion as a foundation for healing. I think self-compassion is one of the most important tools that you can have in your toolbox, because just in my work, I found that we are extremely harsh on ourselves. We have a lot to say to ourselves about how we're doing. And so self-compassion is, and oftentimes I'll ask people, when I bring up this topic, they'll say, oh, I'm a very compassionate person. And what they mean is that they're really compassionate to other people, right? But then when we get started talking and I start hearing about some of the things that they say to themselves, I'm like, that's not very compassionate. That's not very kind. And so self-compassion can alleviate some of the pain. Again, this is not about finding a way. Self-compassion, again, is also not an antidote for grief. It's not going to take your pain away. But my hope is that it alleviates some of the suffering that you go through. So, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means. So, if you're interested in self-compassion, I encourage you to look it up. And I'm going to show you, but we don't have time tonight to go through the different skills that help you build this. But self-compassion is the practice of it is like building muscle. The more you do it, the stronger and more natural it becomes as a practice. So, simple way to explain this is self-compassion is treating yourself in the same way you would treat a friend when they're going through a difficult time. It's one of my favorite things to say to someone when they start telling me that negative story about how they're dealing with something. I'll say, would you say that to your best friend if that's what they were going through? Well, of course not. I would be mean. I would never say that. But that's how we talk to ourselves. So becoming aware. So self-compassion is about both awareness and action. Awareness that you're in pain, and then taking an action to alleviate that pain. And when you're grieving, it may look something like this. You're going about your day, and a song comes on the radio. And immediately, you're brought to tears. I hear songs all the time. People share songs with me all the time. It's just something that moves us, right? Represents. Music is a big piece of grief. So there's a couple ways to handle that, right? I can't do this. Change the channel. That's one way. But a self-compassionate way would maybe to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to let myself feel what I need to feel. This makes me think of my dad or my husband or whoever it is that it reminds you of. And instead, you let yourself cry. And I think a lot of times people think self-compassion, or they think, the way to do this is to push things aside, to dismiss or ignore our feelings. But really, it's about just allowing them to exist and meeting them where they are. So some of the obstacles to self-compassion, why is it hard to be self-compassionate? One is that our brain is hardwired to shift into threat mode to protect ourselves. So if I stick my hand on a hot burner, my body says, pull my hand back and don't ever do that again, right? When something hurts, we don't want to do it ever again, no matter what it is. That is the way our brain is wired. And grief hurts, right? So stepping into something that hurts feels counterintuitive to what our brain is telling us to do. So this is an obstacle to grief. It almost has to be an intentional stepping in, right? An intentional stepping into that pain. Another obstacle sometimes I hear is early life experience for people. So sometimes we're not shown or taught when we're growing up how to be compassionate to ourselves. I honestly, with a lot of people, it never really occurred to them. I mean, it just never occurred to them that they needed to be nice to themselves. Nobody ever said that. Nobody ever taught them that. When I was being raised, when I was young and growing up, it was not uncommon to hear, if I was feeling scared or feeling sick, well, it's buck up. You got to get through it, So paying attention to my feelings was not necessarily something that was, and I'm not judging right or wrong. It just is what it is. So understanding in grief, it's really important to pay attention to those feelings. It's really important to acknowledge them. Another obstacle to self-compassion is what people believe that it's maybe a sign of weakness, or that it's too touchy-feely, or that there's some messaging that we receive that we have to actually get through something, we have to be as hard as possible on ourselves. How else are we going to get through it? But that's the research actually says opposite to that fact. The research says that when we practice self-compassion, we're less negative, we experience less depression, we have less anxiety. I mean, all of these things are where we want to be, right? We're less afraid of failure. We have actually the opposite. We have increased motivation. So that's what the research says. And I think it's really important because there's this messaging that, no, I have to be hard on myself. I have to tell myself I have to get through today, or, I don't have to give examples for us to know what that harsh voice says inside of our mind when we're struggling. So there's 3 components to self-compassion. The first one is self-kindness. So self-kindness means being understanding and accepting and compassionate to ourselves rather than harsh or critical. And self-kindness is exactly what I talked about with that best friend approach. Being kind to yourself is an essential part of it, but it's not all of it. And I think with grief, some of the things that you might hear are, you might have said to yourself, am I supposed to be okay with just not doing as much as I used to do, or not feeling how I used to feel? This is the self-talk that we have inside. Am I, did I handle things poorly? Should I have done something different? Am I grieving incorrectly or wrong? All of those are things that we tell ourselves. And so self-kindness would be to say, no, of course not. You are doing the best that you can with what you have in this moment. And I truly believe that each of us are doing that. We're doing the best that we can with what we have right now. Another part, and this is a practice. So these are practices that you can do to develop more kindness to yourself. One is focusing on your body, eating healthy things, getting a massage, taking a walk, breathing, all of those self-care things. I often tell people, I think, see your doctor. Are you making sure that you're taking care of you? Another way is to write a letter to yourself. Think of a situation that caused you to feel pain. Write a letter to yourself, kind of describing the situation, but without blame. And giving yourself as encouragement, reminding yourself, I am doing the best that I can do in this moment. There are different ways that we can be kind to ourselves. The next piece of self-compassion is common humanity, and a common sense of humanity recognizes that we're more alike than we are different. I know in the beginning of this, I talked about that one slide had all the things that makes our different grief process unique, our journey unique. At the end of the day, you're all sitting in here, and each one of you is connected in the fact that somebody you love dearly died, and you're in pain because of it. And that's the common humanity. That's the connectedness that is required in self-compassion. You are not in this alone. Everyone experiences grief at some time in our life. Even when you feel so alone, you're not alone. So I want you to look around the room and see all of these people in here that are suffering a loss. So that connectedness is really important. And again, I'll go back to one of the obstacles to common humanity is our fierce independence in our culture. We are driven, many people are driven not to share their pain with other people because they should be able to do it on their own, and it's viewed as weak or that it's not okay. So I'm here to tell you it is okay. I'm here to tell you it's necessary. So we must share that and connect with each other to lighten that. And this is a meditation, and if you guys registered, and I have your email address, I'll be emailing you this, but I wanted to just put up here, this is a meditation for compassion, and if you Google that, you can find different meditations. There's actually a meditation for self-compassion on her website. There's a Kristen Neff, she's the one who does a lot of research, and you can find a lot of good meditations, sayings, practices that help you actually build this muscle of self-compassion. But the last piece of it is mindfulness. So mindfulness is being present to your emotions. If you can't be present to your own grief, then how can you offer yourself kindness? So you have to be aware of what you're feeling. And I'll just be quite honest, in our world today, we are moving at such a fast pace that often we don't take the time to be aware, to be present in our own body. So mindfulness is about saying to yourself, I am feeling this right now, and allowing it to exist there. But it's a critical piece of this, because if we don't know we're being harsh on ourselves, then we don't even have a chance, right? We don't even have a chance to offer ourselves that kindness and self-compassion. So a practice that you can take is a self-compassion break. So actually, if you feel comfortable only, I'll actually walk you through this one. So I want you to think of a situation in your life that is difficult and call it to mind. And you can just say this in your own head, but I want you to say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. That's the mindfulness piece. And the next, you would say, suffering is a part of life. That's the common humanity. And now, if you feel comfortable putting your hand on your heart, saying to yourself, may I give myself compassion that I need. May I learn to accept myself as I am. May I forgive myself. May I be strong and patient. It's a very simple practice, right? Something everyone can do every day. It can be a challenge though, right? Because you have to get still in that moment. So I'm encouraging you to do some of these practices, build this muscle. So bringing all these components together, be present in your grief. Mindfulness helps you know where you are. Remember that suffering and grief are important and inevitable. They're part of the common human experience. And be kind to yourself. Ultimately, that's the hugest piece of this. Be kind to yourself. There's some practices, again, going back to how do you grow this muscle, right? Trust yourself. Give yourself permission to grieve fully and deeply. Allow yourself time to rest. These are all ways, and again, I will send this to you guys so everyone has this list for cultivating this self-compassion. Practice self-forgiveness. This is a big one. I hear a lot of times people blaming themselves or having difficulty with a particular facet of their grief. So these are all ways that you can practice self-compassion. But at the end of the day, it is a practice, and the only way we get better at it is when we continue to work through that and remind ourselves how important that is in our grief. I know I've talked about this a lot. This is the last slide I have for today. So one of the things that I have touched on a couple of different times is how important that it's so important that you came here tonight, that you gain this knowledge. But I don't want that to end here, okay? So I hope that what you'll take some of this information, and that'll stay with you today as you leave. But I also wanted to take a moment to introduce some of the people in the community that are doing great work so that you have a face with a name. There are people that are running support groups. We also have books that are for sale with journaling. So these are things that you can continue to do as you go through your journey. So part of my mission is to connect the community with these resources, because I don't think we often know that they're out there, but there is support out there. So there's two widows groups that are present today. I want Berkeley to stand up for a second, and she is with Good Grief, and she provides support. So if you have questions about her group, and every group is different. So some have support groups, some meet different times of the year. It's not just in St. Charles, but they're in St. Louis. So Berkeley is a resource for you. If you have questions, she's going to be here. So I hope that you will connect with her. Another widows group we have is Modern Widows Club. And I don't know if there's somebody that would be willing to stand up. Yeah. Thank you. And she's here to answer any questions you have about their amazing organization. And they provide so much support. Again, expands, that's okay. No worries. Expanding even outside, not just St. Charles, but included in St. Louis and beyond. I think they're a national organization. Yes. So thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate that. If you have questions for them, let them know. In the back, we have Share Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Group. So Rose is here from Share, and I know they are also a national organization, but they're located in St. Charles. They are a wonderful organization supporting moms and dads who've lost a child, so an infant, so pregnancy and pre-loss. Rose is here to answer any questions that you may have. Kathy, she's here. If you could stand up so people can see you. Kathy runs a support group for pet loss. So she's also, and Kathy, I'm not sure if it's St. Louis and St. Charles, so it's expanded, right? Okay, it's expanded. So also there. Bereaved parents, we've got a good showing for the bereaved parents group. So Jeannie, Mike, Anne, and Marilyn are all here from Bereaved Parents, and they run a group in Cottleville, and then also you guys are out west, right? Where is the second group started? Wright City Library. So Bereaved Parents is a support group that's out there, and thank you guys for what you do. They are here to answer any questions you might have about their services. And then there's also, and I'm not sure there's anybody here for the Soul group, but the Soul group, yes, thank you. Soul group is here. They are a peer support group for anyone who has lost a loved one to overdose, drug use, or alcohol use. So thank you for being here. And she's available to answer any questions if there's anyone who has questions about that. And then lastly, there's a group, Just Enduring, that provides supportive services to those who have lost a child. So is there anybody here from from Just Enduring? Yes, thank you, thank you. And so she's here to also answer questions. And if I could have you guys kind of stand to the side at the end, so if anybody does want to, they can find you quickly, because as we exit, it'll just be kind of a mass exodus. But I wanted to introduce them to you tonight because grief work can't be done alone. It shouldn't be done alone. We need each other. And we need each other to show up. We need to be able to reach out. And so I just want to say that we're here to do that. I know also there are, if showing up to a group, that may be too much. I know that there's virtual groups out there. Baue has support groups that they do. There's, yes, yep, that's right. Baue's represented, right? There's support groups that are there. So seek them out. They are there to support you. If not, if it's counseling, if it's something more individual, absolutely seek that out. But if it's just reading books, if it's journaling, whatever you do, just do something. And I appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, that was quite a bit more impressive than my buffalo story. So, again, I just want to thank you guys for coming out. Use this opportunity to find your connection in your community. Find that therapeutic group that's going to help you walk into that storm. So again, we have refreshments over here. We have staff to help. Please give us that survey. We'd like some feedback on how to make things better, different, faster, stronger. Okay, so thanks again for coming out tonight, and be safe on your travels home.